Thank you everybody for being with us this morning. I apologize for the weather. I wouldn't exactly call this Chamber of Commerce weather. We'll have to find out who on staff is responsible for it. We'll have a discussion with them. So I apologize for the rain. I appreciate everyone being here. As you all know, Election Day is November 6th. Early voting started this Tuesday. One Acadiana makes it a priority to educate our members and investors and the public at large on the issues that are going to show up on the ballot on the upcoming elections. Among other important ballot items, there are 6 proposed constitutional amendments and a statewide proposition on fantasy sports betting on the ballot. There are also 2 new proposed millages on the ballot in Lafayette Parish. And we have some of the experts here to speak with you about these issues today. First, we'll be joined by Steve Procopio, Policy Director for the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana, commonly known as PAR. PAR, as you know, publishes an annual guide to the constitutional amendments, which we encourage you to download at their website at parlouisiana.org. We're also honored to have Senator Paige Cortez with us this morning. Senator Cortez, thank you for being here. To provide additional perspective on Constitutional Amendment number 4. Senator Cortez, from Lafayette here, serves as chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, and he authored the legislation for Amendment number 4, and recently just finished up his DOTD roadshow, which I think went very well, and we had a good turnout here in Lafayette for that. We provided more information about this amendment on the one-pager at your seat. Before turning you over to Stephen, I want to point out the index cards in front of me. As you have questions during the presentations, please write them down and hand them to one of our staff that you see around the room. And I will also ask, please do your best to write legibly so that we can read them, because actually I'll be the one reading them at the end, and it would be better off. You want the question to be what you're asking and not what I make up, because I can't read your writing. We'll have time for audience questions after our speakers have had a chance to present. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stephen Procopio.
Thank you all so much. This is my 3rd year doing this, and I didn't realize that was actually when the branded ballots over breakfast happened. As I'm driving in from Baton Rouge with the construction and the rain, it was a little tough. So maybe y'all should think about pushing this back to like June. Just think it over. PAR, if you don't already know, is a nonpartisan good government watchdog group. We put out this guide to the constitutional amendments. Here it is in paper form. Y'all can find it on our website. And we don't take a stance on these things. We try to be neutral. We really just try to give the pros and cons and set up the context and really let people decide. We often get asked, okay, but what really are your positions? And our standard line is, we take no positions on these ridiculous amendments. A little bit of context before we begin on the amendments. Our most recent Constitution is referred to as the 1974 Constitution. Since then, we've had 189 amendments. That is compared to the 27 that happened in the U.S. Constitution. 95 of them have been in Article 7, which is the finance one. It has most of the taxes and special funds and mechanisms that deal with financing the state. In 1974, the Constitution was 35,000 words long. 6,000 of them were in Article 7, again, the financing chapter. So that's about 17% of the Constitution dealt with finances. In 2018, it is 80,000 words long, so more than double, and 32,000 words, almost as long as the original Constitution was, are in Article 7. So that's gone from 17% to 40%. And not coincidentally, 4 out of the 6 amendments that you're on the ballot are dealing with Article 7. And that's not to say these are bad amendments. It's just that once you have so much stuff that's in the Constitution, that's what you want to change, you have to have a constitutional amendment. So it's a little bit of a vicious circle. All right, amendment number 1. Prohibit felons from public office for 5 years after serving a sentence. So the most important context to know here is that this actually used to be the law of the land. In 1998, there was a constitutional amendment to have a 15-year prohibition from felons from serving in office. So you had to actually serve your sentence and then wait 15 years until you could actually seek office. But in 2016, the Supreme Court, the Louisiana Supreme Court found that the constitutional amendment was adopted with some technical issues. You don't need to get into it, but it wasn't anything substantive wrong with what the bill was, or the amendment was. It was actually just how it was proposed, and there was one form that was published versus what actually happened, and so they said, no, that's unconstitutional. So this is essentially going back to what was the law, but instead of having 15 years, it'll be 5 years. So that's the major difference between what the law used to be and what this will propose. In terms of, for and against, pro, we're having an issue with corruption in the state. This is an anti-corruption proposal, and plus people already voted for this. This is kind of something people have already decided they want. On the con side, you get the argument that people have paid their debt to society. They've gone through, they've done what they're supposed to do, and furthermore, voters really should decide. Maybe in some cases, a year is fine. And whenever they get to run for office, in some cases, maybe 5 years is too short. But really, that should be left up to the voters who this person is going to represent. Amendment number 2. Require unanimous jury verdicts in all felony cases. Now, this is probably the one that's gotten the most attention. There's been a lot of discussion over this, as there should be. This is a fairly significant amendment either way. Right now, for most felonies, you need 10 out of 12 on a 12-person jury to render a verdict. And I think that's important, not to convict, to render a verdict. That could be a verdict for guilt or innocence. And it's like that for all felonies except for capital felony. Capital felony, which is first-degree murder. So if you lose your life, you actually have to have unanimous verdict. Now, this would move us that all of the felonies will require a 12-person verdict. Not getting into, we actually have this sort of weird quasi-felony / misdemeanor things, which you can have a 6-person verdict on. Those sort of lesser felonies. That would change. The arguments for, now, this has an interesting past, to put it very positively. This was initially put in the 1898 Constitutional Convention, which was explicitly racist. It basically said, we're adopting this Constitution to ensure white supremacy, and had all of the various provisions in it, including this one. It was a little bit different. It was 9 out of 12, but basically the same thing. You add to that that there's a lot of impact that even today has a disparate impact on minorities. 48 other states also, 48 other states require unanimous verdicts. Only us in Oregon that don't. Plus the federal system also requires unanimous verdicts. Somehow they make it work. On the con side, plenty of people acknowledge, yes, this has a racist past, but if we do this, it's going to result in a lot more hung juries. And there are other developed nations, most notably England and along Scotland and Ireland, also don't require unanimous verdicts, so actually can make it work. There's been a lot of attention to this. You see a lot of people, and not to say this necessarily make it a good thing, but you've seen a lot of groups on both the conservative and liberal side of both practice. I think both the ACLU and the Louisiana Family Forum are for it, which is just interesting to note in and of itself. We won't see that coalition too often. Amendment number 3. Allow political subdivisions to engage, to exchange public equipment and services. Essentially, you let them share resources among the local governments. There is a provision in the Constitution that says governments, state and local, cannot donate things to the private sector. They have to get something to each other. They cannot donate goods or services. They have to get something for that in return. And so this came about. The Denham Springs wanted to share something with Walker, and in fact they did, and then the legislative auditor wrote them up and said you can't do this because it violates the donation clause. And they tried some laws, but essentially this is an amendment to fix that so you can share across local subdivisions. The state still can't do this. The reason for is that sharing resources is more efficient. You really should be able to do this. This is just sort of bureaucratic nonsense. The reason against it, it's really not needed. The Constitution lays out for cooperative endeavor agreements where you could actually share with others as long as they're to get some sort of benefit. And it doesn't have to be a cash benefit. It can be, this bulldozer will help, pave roads, which make it good for everyone in the surrounding area. Or, you're going to use it to clear out ditches, which then make drainage better for everyone. You can actually make this work under the current Constitution. Amendment number 4. I won't go into this too much. This is Senator Cortez's amendment. Prohibit using money in the Transportation Trust Fund by state police for traffic control purposes. And I'll let them mostly talk about this. And I try to present a balanced presentation. I'm going to lean a little bit against, just because I know he's going to be a little bit for. Not completely. So we have a state gas tax, 20-cent gas tax that goes into what's known as the Transportation Trust Fund. And most of that can only be spent on construction and maintenance of roads and other infrastructure. There's 20% of it can be spent on other things, like ports, flood control, and state police for traffic control. This amendment would remove the state police for traffic control as one of the allowed uses. It's going to put more money toward infrastructure. Against is traffic control is important. It helps with the flow of traffic, which is just as important as doing other things, expanding range. And we really haven't been doing this for the last several years, so it's not going to make any kind of immediate impact. That wasn't too bad. Number 5. Allows special assessments for certain homes held in trust. All right, this is not necessarily interesting, but it's a little complicated. So there are a lot of special property tax treatments. I think the most notable one is the homestead exemption. Everyone gets a homestead exemption for your primary residence. There are also 5 other ones. They're not necessarily exemptions. Sometimes it's just your assessment is frozen. So if you're over 65, or if you're a disabled veteran, or if you're the spouse of a surviving military, or the spouse of someone who died in the line of duty, or you're totally disabled. So there's a whole bunch of different exemptions. Sometimes it's a freeze, sometimes you get a better exemption, sometimes you have to pay taxes at all. It just depends, and there's a lot of little details on this. Now, people will occasionally put their property in trust as part of succession planning. And the way it was described to me is that in order to avoid probate, you might put it in trust. And you just also want a better handle on what you're doing. So, you might spend $3,000 or $4,000 to eventually save $10,000 later on to do this. The problem is the Attorney General came up with an opinion that says, okay, the homestead exemption clearly allows for property in trust. You can still get it. It does not allow for all these other things. So if you put your property in trust and you're the surviving widow of someone who died in the line of duty, you would lose all the special exemptions that would come with that. And this would essentially fix that and say, basically, if you were going to get this before, and the only thing stopping you is putting your property in trust, then you would now get it. For and against, it's basically you're for those special exemptions and you think they're worthy and trusts are fine, and the homestead exemption already does it anyway. This would extend those things. And against it, it's just a sort of another extension, although a very small one. It won't affect many people. It essentially whittles away at what we have as our local tax base. And number 6, require a phase-in for primary homes when assessment increases by more than 50%. So, you get your assessment, and hopefully, if the area is doing well, your house is appreciating in value, you get an increase. In some areas, particularly New Orleans, but it can be other places, you might get a really big assessment. So if your assessment goes over 50% of its current value, so a really big assessment, which means a really big increase in your tax bill, this would phase in the taxes you have to pay on that by 25% a year. So if you have to pay an extra, $1,000, which is going to be more than that, but you would pay $250 additional each year. So you start with 25% of the increase, then 50% of the increase, and 75% after 4 years, you're paying 100% of the additional increase. A couple important points. Doesn't count if your assessment went up because of construction or something you did to improve the property. All right, this is the surrounding area went up. It's out on your primary residence, just like your homestead. And it doesn't apply or transfer if you sell your property. So it's really there to help with sort of shock. There's a lot of sort of Airbnb interest in some areas in New Orleans. Even if you weren't doing it yourself, if you lived in a neighborhood that did it, your property value went up quite a bit. So that's really what you do to help people absorb the shock. Reasons against, if you have slightly less than a 50% increase, like say 35% or more, you actually end up paying more taxes than the people that got 50% assessment. It's relatively rare. This doesn't happen that much. It adds an additional complication to the whole system. And remember when I talked about amendment number 1 had to do with felons running for office? and got ruled unconstitutional because there were technical issues. There might be some technical issues with this one. So we'll just have to see. The language used on the ballot is not exactly the same thing as what this is actually doing. And it's going to be up to the court to see if that's close enough or not. So that's all the amendments. Just let me quickly spend some time on the ballot issue. Land yet. It's fantasy sports contests. And so each parish is going to get to vote on shall fantasy sports contests be permitted in the parish of whatever parish you're in. So quick show of hands. How many people know what fantasy football is? Okay, good. If you don't know what fantasy football is, you like ask someone next to you. Apparently. So, a lot of people play fantasy football. Some people also may wager on it when they do it. I'm not going to admit that I've done that in public, but you probably, one of those people you sit next to probably broke the law. This would allow this to be legal in your parish if you vote for it. And then the legislature's also got to come back and pass some additional rules. This won't automatically make it happen, but it means, okay, now this will be legal, and then the legislature come back and establish additional rules and regulations. It will only be for online contests. So most people tend to do this online. Very few people do this by pen and paper anymore. But there are actually some vendors, like DraftKings, I'm not sure. They actually sort of have this website that you can go to, and they do these fantasy leagues. I think you can do them like weekly almost. Now, I need to make sure this is very different. This is not just sports betting. So you can't, if this becomes legal, just go and bet on the Saints or wherever. It's actually, you have to like select your players, and you have a team of different people, which I think is important to some people. That's an important distinction. 4. Basically, people already do it anyway. There's also the additional money. It may not be that much. We don't know exactly how much money we'll bring in because the legislature does. The only thing that will happen automatically is if you get winnings, then you'll have to pay income tax on it. That's the only automatic thing that will kick in. Probably the legislature will come back and put some additional fee tax or something on it. Don't know exactly how that works. They still need to work it out. But there will be, even if they do nothing, there'll be some additional revenue. Against, this is certainly a technical issue, and legal people will disagree. And gambling is not constitutional, but basically this is an expansion of gambling. People argue to death over this. That's not gambling because it's a contest of skill. So, but, well, I still want to represent what the actual law is. But yeah, basically that's how people do it. And there's actually, I'm going to sure I want to cite this in our research, and there's plenty more information in our guide. But, for example, the Card Center did a research that said 40% of people from 6th to 8th grade, from 6th to 12th grade have already gambled in one form or another. And so this would actually make that worse. You're just opening up another avenue to do it. There's supposed to be technical things that these online people can do to stop you if you're young, but good luck with that. Any of you have kids in the internet, they know way more about it than we do. So good luck. But at least they will have put some barriers in there. So that is it's not a constitutional amendment, but since it's going to be everywhere on the ballot, it's a ballot issue, we also come up with that. So with that, I'm going to say sometime before December 14th. Okay. And I think we're going to have questions later. So I'm happy to answer any questions then.
Thank you, Stephen. And that was about as good a succinct job of telling you what's on the ballot, and so great job by Stephen, as he always does. I'm in the retail furniture business, and I would suggest that if you're a contractor and you build spec houses, you're in the gambling business as well. So, and it's sometimes skillful and sometimes not so skillful. I want to talk quickly on amendment number 4. I did author the amendment, and I'll give you a little bit of the backdrop. Stephen hit on exactly what it does. We have a transportation trust fund. It's a constitutionally dedicated fund for certain purposes. So the legislature has no discretion with what to use that other than the constitutional provisions that are allowable. Currently, as he mentioned, there are a number of allowable uses. One is for the construction and maintenance of road and bridges. That's what the majority of it gets used for. Also for ports, we have what we call the Port Priority Program. For airports, we have the Airport Priority Program. For the Transportation Trust Fund of the parishes, called the Transportation Trust Fund. State police is one of those allowable uses. So let me tell you what makes up the Transportation Trust Fund, what taxes go into it. It's basically the gasoline special fuels taxes that go into it. Now, there's a federal tax, and these taxes are paid at the rack. So you don't actually go in and have your, like you do on a sales tax, this was your charge and this is your tax. The tax was paid and it was blended in there. So when the convenience store or the gas station buys it, when they buy it from the wholesaler, they pay the tax over there for how many gallons they get. And remember, it's pennies on the gallon. It's not a percentage. It's not like a sales tax. So it's an easily collectible tax. So let's talk real quickly about it. So some of it is the federal tax that funds the Federal Transportation Trust Fund, that we draw down federal dollars, whether it's the MPO locally that draws them down. That's where they're getting that money from. The state tax is the state portion of the Transportation Trust Fund. It's 20 cents, but it's broken out into two different elements. 16 cents was the original Transportation Trust Fund, and then 4 pennies was voted on in 1990 or 89, and it created the TIME project, Transportation Infrastructure Model for Economic Development. And it created all of these roads up to Monroe and from Shreveport down to Lake Charles, and the speed trap from Alexandria to Lake Charles, and all of these beautiful roads were created. There was a bunch of projects, and 2 of them still haven't been built because the UEP was a beautiful project, and it was $1.5 billion, and it was, I think, on the books is maybe like a $300 million project. We also have the Audubon Bridge in St. Francisville that was only going to be, what, $150 million or $50 million. It's turned out to be, $250 million. And all of these went over budget. So that 4 pennies that went to pay bond indebtedness are no longer paying that bond indebtedness. They're now dipping into the 16 cents. So they're paying part of that 5th penny is now going, because each penny on the sales tax gets us about $30 million. Not sales tax, excuse me. On the fuel tax. So we get about $600 million. Well, that tells you how much we're paying in bond indebtedness. So less and less money is going to construction and maintenance of roads and bridges. And that, if you look at the bond payments, it doesn't do this, it does this. So it's going up and up and up. And that's a beautiful thing to do in politics. Give it to your grandkids, the problem. Make it look good for you today. So when that happened, they spent all the money, and they said, look, we're going to be in office for a few more years, so let's keep it low, pay just interest. And then when somebody else gets in there, we're going to pop it to them. Same thing happens in our retirement system, the UAL. We have all these, well, thank goodness a few years ago, we said we're going to flatten out those payments. Now, there's a lot of pain today on that, and I'm digressing into another, but the point is, you should pay as you go. And so what does this do? This says that since 1990, it was an allowable expense to fund the state police for traffic control purposes. Now, how do I know what state police is using in their money for traffic control and for this and for that? That's what they do. They do traffic control. They do a lot of other things, but that's one of the things they do. So one of the questions I asked them, how much? How much do they use? Since 1990, in the first 25 years of that allowable expense, over $700 million has been taken out of that fund to fund the state police. Every governor has done it in their executive budget, with the exception of, I think, Governor Blanco did it maybe 1 year out of her 4 years. And this governor decided, he ran on the platform that he wasn't going to use the Transportation Trust Fund to fund state police. So he hasn't done it. So Stephen's right. It hasn't been done. But what he didn't mention, the other side of the story, was Terry Landry, the state representative from Lafayette, filed a bill. Former colonel of the state police, the head of the state police, said, they don't need that money. They got the state general fund. They need to go fight for their state general fund dollars. So he passed a statute that says, we're going to do a stair step down, and over the next 3 years, we're going to limit them to $10 million maximum. Well, that passed. It was a statute. Well, every year we pass the appropriations bill, which says we're taking this money and giving the authority to this department to spend it. It's called expenditure authority. Well, the appropriations bill quite often is named the last expression of legislative intent. So it can supersede any previous statute. But it can't supersede the Constitution. So this bill would actually say, even if you want to do it in the appropriations bill, next governor or the governor after that, you can't, because it's going to be taken out of the Constitution as a possibility to use it. So people ask me, why did you bring it? Well, a couple things. One, if you've been to any of the road shows, if you've driven around the state of Louisiana, and look, I'm not blind to the most districts are very tax averse. They don't want to pay taxes. But they want roads. They want good roads. You go to other states like Florida or Texas, they have better roads, North Carolina. But when you drill down and say, well, where are they getting the money for? You're probably paying a toll if it's during peak hours in Texas or Houston or Dallas or wherever. If you're going down the Florida Turnpike, you're paying a toll. If you're going to a beach in Florida, you're paying a toll. They didn't get those roads through the gasoline tax. They got it through tolls, and they got it through sales tax dollars, what we call general fund dollars. So we're one of the few outlier states that only limits our transportation monies to what's in the gasoline tax. Most other states, like Texas, uses severance taxes, which we would call general fund. Florida uses sales taxes. North Carolina uses a lot of different things. They have a beautiful road system up there. You get what you pay for. Tolls are going to be coming part of the future, and I'll just kind of, and somebody's supposed to be giving me the cut when I run over time, so just let me know. So what's happening is if you go down to Belle Chase, there is a new bridge that's being constructed. They call it the Belle Chase Tunnel. It's being condemned, it should have been 20 years ago. And they're going to be putting a toll bridge there. And it's really interesting down in that West Bank area because they're going to be, other than LA1 and over the Pontchartrain, it's going to be the only toll in the state of Louisiana. It may be the future. So with that, obviously I'm for the amendment because of the bill. Thank you all. Thank you for the time you've given me.
Thank you, Senator Cortez, and thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. Let's not forget, there will be an opportunity for questions. So we've had a couple of questions come in already, but write those questions down on those index cards, and you'll wave them around. Andre and others will come and collect those cards if you have questions that you want to answer. As a reminder, again, with those questions, our next speakers will discuss the two new proposed millages on the ballot in Lafayette Parish. One to support the parish jail and the other to support operations of the district court. These gentlemen are longtime colleagues, both in their third terms in the Lafayette City Parish Council. Jay Castile of Carencro represents District 2. He's a proud graduate of Carencro High School and UL Lafayette. And Kenneth Boudreaux of Lafayette represents Council District 4. He's a proud graduate of Northside High School and of UL Lafayette. So we would like to welcome both of them up here to discuss the ballot issues. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
We didn't rehearse anything. We don't have any acts or skits prepared, so we're just going to kind of wing it like we've been doing. Just to add to that introduction just a little bit and to address something that was recently announced. I am in my third and final term along with Councilman Castile. I've been chair of the council 3 times. Jay has been chair of the council twice, so 5 of the last 11 years we have led this council. I've been finance chair 7 times, and Jay has been finance chair twice. So 9 of those 11 years, we've headed the finance aspect of things. So when we went into this millage process and in this evaluation over the last about 2.5 years, we brought quite a bit of experience to the situation and some significant hardships, if you would, that has been taken on over that time period. We specifically and intentionally balanced that activity by making sure that both the city and the parish was represented. Of course, I represent a majority city of Lafayette population. Jay represents a majority of parish of Lafayette population. And then we coupled that with Bruce Kunk from District 6, who is the one and only district that has 100% city population, and Kevin Nakan, who represents the majority of the parish. So we made sure that we had balance, tried to do our best due diligence. We visited every city council in the parish of Lafayette directly. We sat and spoke with every mayor that is within the parish of Lafayette directly. We had a number of public meetings and forums and presentations made. So someone asked yesterday, obviously the mayor president Robideau has come out and he has not said I would not support, he said I oppose. And I define that for people that say not supporting just mean he ain't going to vote for it, but opposing means he's telling everyone else not to vote for it. And to be quite honest with you, I'm fine with that. Joe has a huge responsibility as the mayor president of Lafayette to do what he feels is in his best interest. But what I have said is that I write that off as the fact that he's been here 3 years, we've been here 11 years. And there will be some things, and Jay kind of used the term over this process, we just refuse to kick the can down the road. Paige referenced something really, really nice that I appreciate. You know, he said it's common in politics to say, give it to your grandchildren. It takes courage to say we're going to take it on ourselves. We took some hits. We've been criticized, and no one likes taxes, and that's fine. But also, like the senator said, you know, we can't go to other areas and talk about how great things are and then come home and want that without being willing to pay for it. And that took us a stance, and I think some courage for us to subject ourselves to say, look, these are the facts, these are the real issues, and this is what we're addressing. So I just want to read something to you that a representative of the current administration said when these millages was up, and just to kind of give you an idea of what we take on. Lori indicated that when these millages was up for renewal last year, just one sentence, the adult correctional center millage is used for the same purposes, and it also covers the state-mandated cost of feeding, housing, medical care, and transportation of prisoners, okay? Now, that is huge. I can tell you when we came on the council, we were spending $1 million just in medicine at the jail. I don't know if we have any pharmaceutical folks here, anyone in the medical profession here, but $1 million. Because today, when you look at hypertension, when you look at diabetes, when you look at the number of HIV positive inmates, it's a different world than 1985 when this jail was put into effect. So I use that as just a talking point to show the difference that has come into play when the jail was the 6th floor of the parish courthouse and it was called the jail courthouse complex versus the brand new building of a 3-story facility standing alone with no millage increase at the time. And inmates stuffing linen in the sewer system and having hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs there and HVAC systems going out after 15 and 20 years of services, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in repair. So these are real issues. They don't affect all of us. But we had an interesting experience when we visited Dusson. The day we were in Dusson, Louisiana was the same day that the Dusson Police Department took down a guy with a military-grade gun, rifle, assault rifle. I don't want to offend none of the number 2 people in here like I am. But they arrested someone, and we were in front of the Dusson City Council. And at the time, the sheriff was concerned because we took all of his capital dollars from the year before. He wasn't able to do any of the improvements he needed to do. And we were threatening to take them again this year. And I just asked the Dusson Council, do you appreciate the ability to bring that inmate into Lafayette and put them into this parish facility which you utilize? Or would you rather keep him here in Dusson? And it was no question what they wanted to do. That jail services everyone in the parish, including those police departments and municipalities outside of the city of Lafayette. So these are some real hard issues. I'm going to let Jay go through them because I like the way Jay said we just refuse to kick the can down the road any further. I can tell you that these are funds that are truly needed, and its objective is actually the general fund of Lafayette. You know, when someone says we've been able to provide a budget, yeah, absolutely, at the cost of roads, bridges, and drainage. Yeah, we could continue to do a budget, but we're going to continue to have other problems. Because of these state mandates, we saw an opportunity to let the voters decide, once they are truly knowledgeable and educated of what this will do, to determine if they want to continue to deplete the general fund, which we are almost at 0 for the parish of Lafayette, or do they want to allow a millage to pay for these costs of the district courthouse and the jail on its own, and allow those general fund dollars to be used to other demands that our citizens has asked for, number one being drainage. So that was the main objective. I'm gonna let Jay chime in now and just kind of give some insight there, and we'll be able to answer questions.
Yeah, like Kenneth said, we took on this thing 2 years ago. We visited everyone, had a lot of public hearings, had some suggestions that were made, but we needed some long-term solutions to these problems. These mandates that come down from the state, they come straight out of the general fund in the parish. And the parish general fund is $12 million we left it. And out of the 12, 8.5 go to these two areas. So that'll leave you a whole lot of money for roads and drainage and bridges and other things that you need for the parish. Okay. So when you look at the first proposition, which is for the jail, it's going to collect about $6.6 million. Well, that's what it's costing them now. And we've been cutting the jail for the last probably 4 or 5 years. So in all actuality, it's about a $10 million facility to operate that jail. So we're still going to subsidize some of that jail cost through the general fund. But this is going to take $6.6 million, put back in the general fund to where we can start doing things on the parish side. You know, our parish has been limping along for a long time. You know, people don't think about the parish because everybody lives in the city. We have 70,000 people who live in unincorporated areas, but the majority of people live in the cities. Well, when you say parish, they kind of look at well, everybody lives in the parish. Not everybody lives in the city. So the parish is like the umbrella, like the big brothers, kind of take care of everything. That's what we're trying to do. The jail itself, like Kenneth said, you went from a 1-story jail to a 5-story jail on the same millage. And then I get the argument, well, we have more population and we'll be paying taxes so that millage continues to grow. But so does the expenses and the operations of those facilities. You know, you think about it, if this tax was passed in 1964 and the population doubled since then, great. Taxes doubled since then, great. So have the expenses. They tripled. So when you look at it, the argument of, well, you know, the parish has grown so much and you're collecting all these taxes, why do you need it more? Because it's costing us more to operate these facilities. You know, the $6.6 million, like I said, that's what it's paying today to operate the jail. So for a $10 million facility to operate, not top notch, but where it needs to be, you know, we're still going to subsidize. The parish-wide district courts. When you talk about district courts, nobody really understands when you say district court. So your judges, all their employees to run these prisoners through the system. We're going to collect $4.5 billion on that tax. Their operation, just from the parish budget, was $2.6 million about 3 years ago. But we started cutting that back because we had to find funds. So this is going to replace that 2.6, and it's going to give the parish, the judges, funding to upgrade and get the 21st century with their courtrooms. And it's going to help them redo all their work areas, their operation. And it's going to get them out of the general fund. We're going to get $2.6 million back into our general fund from this area. These are 2 standalone taxes that we're taking out of the parish general fund. These 2 areas cannot go out and raise these funds. Can't do it. The judges can't do it, and neither can the jail. So it has to come from the parish general fund. So if we keep taking money out of that parish general fund to fund these mandates, we're going down the wrong road. Because you continue to flood, you continue to eventually going to gravel roads in the parish. And everybody says, well, I live in the city, we better pretty good. Yeah, but sometimes you got to cross that parish area to get to your job or to go visit your family who lives in unincorporated areas. So we look at this as trying to help everyone by taking these 2 funds out of the parish general fund, put them on their own, stand alone, and let the parish get back on its feet and start doing what it's supposed to be doing, taking care of the people of the parish, the entire parish, including the city of Lafayette, everyone. So that's pretty much the spiel that I wanted to tell you guys about. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions for or against. That's fine. Like Kenneth said, we took a lot of shots, got a lot of good reviews. But I think this is the best thing for the parish as a whole. And that's how we have to think about this parish.
So with that said, Jay brought up a very good point. It would have been great if judges could be standing here telling you how important they need this, but of course there's some ethical restraints and some, political wisdom that says that they're not going to get out in front of certain things. The sheriff could come and tell you how bad the jail actually is, and it would look much better than city council members, because everybody hates their city council, and that's okay. But you love a sheriff, you love a judge, and even keep this in mind, the district attorney was also a consideration for this, but the district attorney opted out. You know, in a public meeting, he said he'll fall on the sword because he recognized the importance of this. Not far from here, he said, I will get out in front of attacks specifically for the district attorney's office, because you remember the DA sued the parish of Lafayette for the cutting of his budget. This is the severity of what we're dealing with. So when someone says we could present a budget, absolutely, we could present a budget that says zero, but there are some consequences and repercussions that come from it. So unfortunately, we don't have other individuals other than council members to get out in front because it's our obligation. Like we said, it's a state mandate. They said the parish of Lafayette shall do these things. Well, we are the parish of Lafayette. And that's what puts us out in front as opposed to the professional individuals who would ultimately manage these dollars and apply them to their needs and resources. So in closing, I'm going to just tell you what this does for the general fund. Just hopefully just to put it in just plain reality for you. We took on a proposal a couple of weeks ago to buy the parish's parking garage to the tune of about $770,000. Why? Because the parish of Lafayette cannot fix their parking garage because they don't have the funding to do so. So the proposal was for the city of Lafayette to buy it, which we denied that for rightful cause. Because we would have bought something that less than a week later was closed due to the fact that it was not safe to be used. We have facilities throughout the parish that we cannot afford because we don't have the revenue that is needed to pay for its operation. The city of Lafayette Fire Department did a $500,000 capital project this past year in the parish's Lafayette War Memorial Building for the sake of keeping that building habitable. So we put our City of Lafayette Fire Division in there called Fire Prevention, along with some parish operations. The parish simply cannot afford to operate regardless of what anyone tells you. So it's going to be today, it's going to be our grandchildren. Someone is going to have to take this issue on and do something about it. But the parish cannot afford to operate in simply disposing of assets and other properties is not the answer. We have to get to the point where we can take care of what we have. So again, thank you all. We ask you for your considerations. Look forward to your questions. We know taxes are tough. I often like to say I just own a little small LLC, but I work and I got a couple of properties and I pay taxes, but I like to use Jay as an example because Jay owns a lot of properties and he's a builder and so we tax it ourselves. We're not exempt. This isn't something that we're trying to put on the backs of someone else. I would argue that Jay would be hit as hard as anybody based on some of the properties that he has in the business that he's in. And it's just the reality of it. And I think it's those 11 years that just give us a little different perspective than the current mayor president. Not that he is wrong or out of line. I think he has a 3-year view. We have an 11-year view. It's like the ground level view versus the 30,000-foot view. And it's as simple as that. So again, thank you very much.
Give a round of applause for our council members one more time. Okay, once again, remind you, we've got a few questions here. If you have further questions, please write them down on a card and raise your card up, wave it around, and someone will come collect it and bring it up here to me, and we'll ask those questions. Let's give one more round of applause for everyone that spoke today. We really appreciate it. The first couple of questions that we have are Stephen, I think they're going to be aimed at you for response. First, on constitutional amendment number 1, does a no vote mean the 15-year requirement remains in effect?
Okay, that's a good question. So if you vote no, will the 15-year remain in effect? No. Right now, there is no 15-year prohibition. It was overturned. It was not constitutionally adopted. So there is no prohibition right now. So right now, you can get out of jail and immediately run for office. I'm not saying it's epidemic of that happening, but so yeah, there was passed, but that is no longer in effect since 2016. So right now, there is no 15-year prohibition.
Okay. Amendment number 1, will the crime committed be considered, or is this across the board?
No, the crime committed is not considered. There actually was a different bill that allowed felons to vote. That was a bill, and that had some exception for crimes of fraud, something like that. This actually is across the board, so it doesn't make any distinction to the type of felon.
Could amendments 5 and/or 6 be passed at the local or parish-wide level instead of a constitutional amendment?
Let me double check my answer. Okay. No. So the Constitution is very clear. So the number 5 and 6, to summarize, is that tax exemptions for property held in trust. This was the whole, you want to put your property in trust, and there's exemptions, special treatments, like disability or 65. And then 6 was the phase-in. So the Constitution has a lot of language about property taxes in it. It basically, we don't really have a property tax code. That's in the Constitution. So it says, these shall be the exemptions. And it lists a whole bunch of exemptions to the property tax, and no others. So you can't by statute or by local ordinance make a change to the property tax code. So certainly number 5 you couldn't. I could maybe see some arrangement for number 6. If you wrote the millage in such a way that allowed for something like this, maybe. That's kind of speculative. The safest way to do it, if you really wanted to do this constitutionally, would be this constitutional amendment. I'm not saying you couldn't possibly rig something up. Maybe you can on the tax end, because this isn't changing your assessment. This is changing the payment of your taxes. So if when you pass the tax, you have some sort of allowance for it, maybe. But I think that would probably be sketchy.
Okay. All right, Councilman Castillo, Councilman Boudreaux, the jails tax. Will this tax be used to supplement current programs and structure, or will it support new activities or additional programs?
I guess that would depend on, the warden, but with the funds raised from this tax is the main objective was to get it out of the general fund and replaced on its own. So to be honest, I'm not sure if it's going to do anything new, but I know it's going to go ahead and take care of what's currently happening in the jail and try to get back to where it's supposed to be as a jail.
If the question is, if it's tied to rehabilitation type programs, the answer to that is no. This is all facility maintenance only, any and everything to do with facility maintenance, constructions, etc. In addition to that, one thing we did not mention is that the courthouse jail complex, as it is combined now, it kind of shares funding. We came up with the figure that was necessary in talking to both of those entities, that when we separated, 1 year the courthouse had capital initiatives in place that they could not do because the priority became the jail. Or 1 year the jail took priority over the courthouse and the courthouse was put on hold. In addition, remember with the defeating of the courthouse building fund, which was 11 years ago, 12 years ago, when that got defeated, the idea of building a new district courthouse, that has basically completely been taken off the table. Everything now is saying that we're staying where we are. There will be not be the building of a new district courthouse. Therefore, we need to fix the one we have, and those numbers are significant when we talk about, They did the elevators, but inmates still ride with judges and clerk employees and things of that nature. The safety and transportation of inmates within the facility. I could tell you that there's an entire exterior wall that is molding and leaking because of window issues on courtrooms. So it's a significant improvements that's needed to this facility, but from a maintenance perspective only.
How, parish ballot items, again, Councilman Boudreaux, Councilman Castillo, how many parishes in the state have dedicated taxes for these services versus general funds? Is this unique or a common approach?
Well, I don't think there's anyone who has it standalone that I've heard of. But just because no one's doing it doesn't mean it can't be done. We're trying to figure out a way to get the parish back on its feet, and these two mandates, standalone with their own tax, their own funding source, is what we thought was the best way for the parish as a whole. So if we're the only ones that are doing it, or the first one in the state that's going to do it, I can assure you other parishes who are in our condition, they're going to start looking at that also. So if we're going to blaze the trail, then we're going to blaze the trail. We're not afraid of doing anything new. So I think, what I understand, we're the first.
Right, I'm not sure. I know when we had the DA conversation, I think there's 2 parishes in the state that the DA has gone forward with his own millage. Conrad was shaking his head. He may or may not know better information on if anyone has a dedicated tax. But what I would ask is that you consider our objective was the parish's general fund. These 2 specific operations was draining the majority of that general fund. So that's why these 2 were the ones that were considered, and they are not, quote unquote, under the umbrella of LCG. They are not parish recreation. They are not parish roads and bridges, things of that nature. So that's why they were identified as the 2. But if other parishes have those types of dedications, I'm not aware of those.
Yes, other parishes do have millages for their courthouse and jails, so that's nothing new. Specifically for the district court system, that may be relatively new. I don't know if, I can't think of anyone, but there may be another parish that has that. I'm not sure of that.
All right, thank you. On those 2 taxes, if the taxes pass, if those two villages pass, what can the city parish do to assure the added dollars to the general fund get spent on meaningful capital projects such as roads and drainage?
Unfortunately, they don't want me around anymore, so I'll be gone in 14 months. But I can tell you, one of the ideas that have worked recently, and we've done it twice, is to do a rededication. And I think the citizens have been really supportive of when they're explained to say, look, we're going to take these tax dollars and we're going to do these things. I think that's one idea, is that we could do a rededication and not leave it to trust, but put it factual and in writing. Go back into the general fund and reallocate some of that, as opposed to just leaving it out there in a general capacity. That would be the first thing I would suggest, is to rededicate it. If it kicks back in, if we get these 10 or plus so $1 million back, dedicate it to something that the people want. And that would more than likely be drainage. It could touch roads and bridges, but I would think that the majority of it would say we want to put that in our drainage fund.
Oh, it's cleared up.
That often happens with
All right, Stephen, on amendment number 6, does a no vote mean all increases, regardless of the percentage, will take effect immediately?
Right, so if this is again the one that if your tax went, or if your assessment went up by more than 50%, you would phase in the taxes you would pay. So they're saying a no vote, it was asking would it take effect immediately. Yeah, it'd be like any other assessment increase. Your assessment goes up, then you have to pay more taxes. It would be exactly like you have to do now. If it went up 10% or 100%, however you got your assessment, then you have to pay the related taxes to it. So it worked just like it does now.
I have a question. Conrad, has any assessment in Lafayette has seen the increase of 50%? that you're aware
Yes.
of? Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I was telling Paige earlier, that generally happens when we find mistakes. When we have the wrong square footage, or we have the wrong characteristics, or they added a component to the house that we weren't aware of. That's when that usually happens. What triggered this bill was what's going on in Orleans Parish, where you have people going into the Bywater District or other parts of Orleans Parish, buying houses for $150,000, doing some renovation and flipping them for $450,000. And then all of a sudden, people surrounding them get these huge increases. And then there was also this thing going on in Orleans about Airbnb. A lot of people were using their properties for Airbnb, thereby kicking up their values of their properties. Well, the taxes were going up tremendously. I'll tell you, I'm personally opposed to this bill. I think it's horrible. And for this reason, it goes against the two core tenements of the property tax operations throughout this country, and that is fairness and equity. Fairness and equity. If you don't maintain that, you end up what happens in California with Prop 13 that passed years ago, where people's taxes get way out of line, depending on which side of the equation you go. So in this case, if his house goes up 45%, he's got to pay that tax immediately the next year. If he goes up 51%, well, he gets to spread his taxes over 4 years. Well, how is that fair? So it's just not fair. Yeah, it's just not fair and equitable across the board. And so, frankly, I'm against this. And take your own opinion.
Okay. Stephen, I have one thing I want to ask. Going back to the gaming legislation on the fantasy sports, let's just say hypothetically that there's an executive in an organization that knows of a fantasy sports football thing that's going on. I'm asking for a friend. And, we thank you all for being here this morning. I want to specifically thank our speakers again, Councilman Boudreaux, Councilman Castile, Senator Cortez, Stephen. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for spending time with us. Please remember, vote. Voter turnout, we've seen, obviously, not just here, but nationwide, is just not where it needs to be. So please remember to go out and vote. We would also ask you, as a quick public service announcement, please help us recycle the handouts we provided on Constitutional Amendment number 4 by sharing them with a friend. So take those with you and share that information with others if you would. Again, early voting is open. Election day is November 6th. Please go out and vote. And thank you again for being with us this morning.